Welcome everyone to Insider Outsider. I'm your host, Outsider Aaron Grimshaw at Grimshaw Games. Today's special guest is Insider Shane Satterfield at Gamefire. Shane has been a professional games journalist for over 22 years, and he is the creator of Sifted Games, which you can find at sifted.net, a great website that lets you control the content you see about the games and genres you love. You can visit Sifted's Patreon and check out the exciting tiers, including the You Own Me tier, which is the one I picked to make this podcast happen today. Thanks for being here, Shane.
Hey, thanks for having me, and thank you for pledging at that tier, man. It means a whole lot to us, and I'm actually really excited about this. This is a brand new tier on our Patreon. This is the first time we're doing anything for this. And just so people know, at this tier, you basically have an hour with me to do whatever you want, and I think you've been pretty smart to do a podcast. So I'm excited. Let's do this.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I got to say, I'm a big fan of Sifted Games. I mean, I discovered it probably near its inception, and Game Face is definitely a podcast that you and Micheal do every week that I very much look forward to. Haven't been able to ask questions lately because of the timing, but I guess I'll get my chance today to get all my questions in.
You can ask every question. You have an hour to go, so
awesome.
Let's rock it.
All right, so I thought we'd start by talking about the current state of the games industry. I love games, you love games. Where are we right now in the games industry? It seems like these big companies are taking less risk with their game releases and releasing overall less games. Is this a trend we will continue to see, do you think?
I think we'll continue to see it for a while until the bottom falls out. I think what we're seeing is unrealistic expectations from publishers right now. Some publishers are more guilty of this than others, but I think two that kind of stand out to me are Square Enix and Electronic Arts. Both those publishers have had games released in the last few years that by most standards would be gigantic hits, but because of the expectations of the company and therefore the company's stockholders, selling 7 million copies of a game isn't good enough for them. And I think anytime you get to a place where you sell 7 million of anything, not just games, any industry, if you sell 7 million of anything and you don't think that's good enough, I think you need to readjust your business model. So I don't see it going away because there have been a lot of cases where it's been very successful, where games as a service have lived on and generated a lot of revenue. And I think publishers are always going to look at that and say, hey, we can do that too. But I also feel like there's going to be a reckoning here soon, and people are going to realize that, sure, the idea of a long money trail is great, but the risks getting there are so high that it could literally, if you're a smaller publisher, doom you. So there's big risks involved. There's obviously a high payoff. Anytime there's a big risk, there's usually a high payoff, and in this case there is. But I think expectations need to change. I also feel like a lot of times the rush to create games in this genre have sort of sacrificed the quality of existing games or altered existing games. I think a good example of that is Anthem. It doesn't appear that that game was made from the beginning to be a game as a service. It almost feels like it was an idea that came later on in its development cycle. And if anyone's followed the reception of that game since it was released, I think a lot of the problems with it are endemic to that switch in focus mid-development cycle.
So Matt was just saying in the recent Game Face that he felt it really needed more time to bake. Another 6 months would have really done that game probably a lot of favors.
It would. I mean, a lot of the problems that the game has had aren't major, like, game-breaking issues. They're little bugs. It's how the loot works. It's loading times. Those are typically things that can be fixed pretty easily. And, yeah, even like a 6-month extension on the development of that game would have done it wonders. But again, you get caught up in the corporate America and the stockholder sort of fulcrum. And stockholders, they need that money to come in before the end of the quarter, or they sell their stock, and then the value of the company goes down. It's this vicious cycle that never seems to feed into great software being created.
Well, and I'll say I think that's an issue that faces all companies on the stock market. And we are going to talk a little bit about investing in some of these companies later on. But I do find what you said very interesting about the fact that 7 million copies is considered a failure in some cases. And that has to be partially blamed on the expectation, but also how much time and effort and energy and money is being spent on these games. You look at a low budget movie, or I mean, you could look at an indie game as well, and they don't have to make as much money to be a success. That's probably part of the problem for these big companies. They're just trying to do too much.
Yeah, I think also what's kind of been proven over the last couple of months, at least to me, is that a game doesn't have to be a game as a service to be great. In fact, it doesn't even have to be based on game design that's kind of evolved in the last half decade or decade. If you look at a game like Devil May Cry 5 or Kingdom Hearts 3, first of all, those games, at least Kingdom Hearts 3, started back during the PS2 era, but both of those games are designed like games from that era. They're not open world games. They're not games that live on forever. They're very linear, very structured action-adventure games with some light RPG elements. And I think both those games are successful, and I think they prove that you don't need to have a project that takes 8 years to make and that is going to launch and then live on for 3 years to make a successful product in the industry. So I'm hoping the culmination of all this stuff, the financial troubles with games like Anthem, the success of games like Kingdom Hearts 3 and Devil May Cry 5 will slowly sort of get the Titanic steering away from the iceberg, so to speak.
Well, it seems like, yeah, two sort of contrasting problems. You know, the one side being just too much put into a game, and then the other side is like jumping onto a new genre too quickly. I mean, games as a service and Anthem sort of copying Destiny, but also all these sort of Fortnite clones has been another big trend in the industry, and it's too bad that enough companies don't sort of feel confident or maybe don't have the good ideas to try their own thing. And try maybe develop a new genre or take something that's tried and true and just really polish it and make it something special.
Yeah, it's we're in a transition time right now, I think, in the industry. Not only just transitioning as far as genres and how revenue is generated, but also platforms. Obviously, a big discussion topic over the last couple years has been what's going to happen with the next generation of consoles. Michael Pachter, who does Pachter Factor on Sifted, has gone on has gone on record for like 3 years saying that eventually everything's going to streaming. And so that's going to be some big upheaval. I mean, I think Microsoft tried to kind of dip its toes in that with its first announcement of Xbox One. That did not go over well with consumers, but if you watch what's happened in the industry over the last 5 to 7 years, everything's kind of been inching towards what Microsoft initially pitched for Xbox One. So it seems that consumers and players are more open to those ideas now than they were 5 or 6 years ago. I'm sure that the platform holders have picked up on that. So there's going to be a big transition as far as hardware and how that all works and how games content is distributed out on all these different channels instead of just, hey, we have console 1, console 2, console 3. Now they should be able to be disseminated out to dozens and dozens of platforms, and I think that's going to be a big paradigm shift. While that's happening, we have all the genre stuff. Honestly, it feels like the genres are all just blending into one at this point. Today I added a game to Sifted that was just debuted, and it was like a survival action RPG world build. I'm just like, it's almost like they just throw a bunch of genres into a blender and then just pull them out, and they'll be like, the first 4 is what our game is going to be. And I think that's good because it means that almost every game has a little something for everyone. So I think that opens up every game to a wider audience. But there's so many X factors and unknowns right now as far as what's going to happen over the next 3 years, and it's a little scary. But I think more importantly, it's really, really exciting.
It is a very exciting time to be a gamer. For sure, probably the most exciting time it has ever been.
Like ever, yeah, absolutely.
So you have to be thankful for that.
Yep.
Actually, maybe on that topic, where do you think we are as an industry maturity-wise?
Man, that's a tough question. When you say maturity, do you mean the maturity of the industry? Do you mean the maturity of the consumers or the industry?
No, I mean the industry. If you compare to like television or film, they've had these arcs, and they go up and down. But because I'm really curious, as we are in this sort of uncharted territory and we are potentially going to be seeing some new big players in the space. Google and this Mad Box, whatever that is, and in television, which is also interesting. How is that going to sort of interact with the other consoles and how that's working out and just where we are?
Well, first of all, I mean, just from a numbers perspective, the gaming industry is still really young. And also a big difference about the gaming industry when compared to other entertainment mediums is that when gaming launched, it was something that was really only for kids. Television, film has always been for everyone. When games really started, whether rightly or not, it was sort of pigeonholed into this corner of that's the thing that kids do. Even though, I grew up in the arcade era, and I lived in the arcades throughout pretty much the entire 80s, and you saw tons of older people in arcades. For whatever reason, once everything kind of switched over to home consoles, it became this kids thing. And it's really bizarre that it happened that way. And a lot of it probably has to do with the content that was being used to create games back then. A lot of it did appear to be, like a Saturday cartoon or something for kids. And I feel like... and I feel like games have had to fight a really long time to sort of beat that stigma. And not only was it considered just for kids, it was considered for male kids. It was never really something that girls or women were expected to do. And to me, that has been the biggest shift for games over the last 10 years as far as the industry is concerned, is that now everyone considers themselves open, at least, to playing video games. Back when I was even in college, that really wasn't the case. We'd have parties, we'd have people over to play Mario Kart or GoldenEye or whatever. The girls would come over, and they'd all stand in the corner and talk to themselves, waiting for us to finish playing. It's all changed now. Now, you go to a college campus, and you have a party like that, the girls are going to be playing games too. So to me, that is a huge, huge difference. I think the biggest issue we have, honestly, with the industry evolving and growing and allowing opportunities for more developers to be successful are the old school gamers who keep dragging their feet in this forgotten history of it's an activity for the straight white male. And I think a lot of people feel threatened that this is this thing that they've had all to themselves all this time, and now all these other people are coming into it, and they don't feel like it's theirs anymore. That's got to go away. If the industry is going to grow, and if we're going to be able to provide opportunities for more developers and for more people to be successful in the industry, it needs to be open to as many people as possible, and that is exactly what's happening.
Totally agree.
Once these console games get out on these streaming services and people can play them without having to spend $500, it changes everything. So everything's headed in the right direction. However, I think sadly and ironically, it's the hardcore gamers that are holding the industry back to an extent. And in some cases, I think that can be okay, because sometimes when you try to progress too quickly, you make big missteps and make big mistakes. Sometimes when you have those people who are kind of dragging their feet a little bit, it makes you evaluate things even more thoroughly before you make decisions. So I don't want to say that those people are completely destroying the industry or that they're completely holding it back. In some ways, they can make the decisions for the future a little more measured and a little more informed. So I don't like the perspective that those people come at the industry with, but in some ways, it is kind of a useful tool.
It is important. Like, all these parts play a pretty important role in our development as an industry.
Yep.
I agree. I mean, the funny thing is everybody, I would say almost everybody, plays some kind of a game.
Yep.
You look at your grandma, or like when you're growing up, you're playing cards and all these things. So it's kind of an interesting thing that it's just like, well, this is just going to be for one facet of humanity. It's quite ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Nobody talks about that with television and film.
No.
Could you imagine if there were people who were film fans who were dragging their... maybe there are. Well, I guess there are, actually. If you think about, like, the Ghostbusters thing and and what's going on with Captain Marvel right now, there still are people like that are film fans. But their ranks are thinning by the day. And
I don't really understand what they hope to achieve with that. What do they get out of the negativity that they're presenting?
I don't get it either. Again, I think they just feel threatened. This has been this little haven for them, this little thing that was theirs. And I think particularly with like comic book movies, you have a lot of comic book nerds who kind of feel like their thing has been ripped out of their grasp and they're not in control of it anymore. But ultimately, you can't stop progression. That's the thing. There may be bumps in the road. It's like a lot of people get frustrated, not even just with games, but pretty much how slowly things progress anywhere. I think politics is a good example of it. It's a very slow grind. But again, you're not going to stop it. It's just like the stock market. It's like, yeah, there are dips down here and there, but it always ultimately goes up. Always.
Yeah, there's charts you can find online that show from the beginning, and it's a constant
line up. It's also why, investing in stocks or your 401k is the best way to invest, because ultimately it is going to go up. There's going to be a recession, it's going to dip down, but it's going to come back, and it's going to go higher eventually. And I think that that sort of analogy pertains to a lot of things in our society and not just games. But I do think that it's going to apply to games eventually.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the games that I'm really enjoying right now, and I have to thank you and Matt for this, is Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Yeah, I played that for like 70 or 80 hours.
Well, I'll tell you, that's right where I am right now. And,
And enjoyed it the whole time. I never got bored of it or got sick of it. Yeah,
I mean,
it's really a testament.
It's like, okay, am I going to try and clear another fort?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I've been here, I'm kind of doing this thing, but there's enough to keep you sort of engaged as you're going along.
Are you playing to 100% the game, or are you just playing to complete it? Because you could still just be playing to complete it at that point. I mean, I didn't play everything. Like, it took me that long to finish it.
I generally don't make it a goal to 100% games. I let the game sort of dictate how long I'm going to play it.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting, my personal history with the Assassin's Creed is I remember when it first came out, the first two, and you know, obviously it was very novel at the time, and it was a lot of cool things you couldn't do in other games. And but I never beat any of them. I didn't really play them for very long. And then I tried a couple of the other ones, just really couldn't get into it. And then, you know, like I say, I watch Game Face every week, and you guys for at least 2 Game Faces in a row were going off about how much you were enjoying Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and that coupled with being Boxing Week. And Best Buy had it on for like $30, and then
there you go.
In my back of my head, like, I got to try this game. So a funny thing that I found that you mentioned in one of the Game Faces, you weren't a big fan of how the game started.
Yeah.
And the game starts you off in a fight right away.
Yeah.
And you didn't really enjoy that, I guess. But I kind of did, because oftentimes when I'm playing a new game, it does require a bit of a time investment. And you don't know if you are going to like the fighting mechanics. And you don't really want to put like an hour into this game and then find the fighting mechanics and be like, okay, well, that kind of sucks and I'm not interested in this game. So I did actually enjoy the way that game started. I could find right away, I'm like, okay, I can get into this, I'm feeling this, and then now I can get into the game. So
fair point. Totally. Yeah, I get it.
So yeah, I played for about 70 hours. I'm level 46 or something, and you know, I'll probably play for another 10 or 20 hours. You know, I'll probably get to at least level 50. I saw an early weapon that said level 50, so I'm like, oh my god, okay, I'm gonna have to get there at least. But it is interesting the length of these games. We touched on it earlier, but
it really is.
Assassin's Creed with Ubisoft, they took a couple years off between the one before Origins, and that was a big deal because they had sort of coming out every year. So what I'm wondering is where's the sweet spot in these games? Because you're still only getting, you know, in the U.S. I'm in Canada, so a game for me is $90 plus tax.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So
that's a lot.
For you guys, it's like $60.
Yeah.
So you're only going to get $60 out of a consumer without the DLC. Why make a game so big? Why not cut 25% off the end of that game, and then you can make more money, and nobody's going to complain that the game is only 60 hours long.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say nobody's going to complain. There's always someone that complains. Always. It's just the way it is. Someone's going to complain. Personally, my sweet spot is like 35 hours. To me, for $60, you get 35 hours out of a game. You're getting your money's worth and then some. But what I would say is I think your perspective on this is all about your perspective. So, you know, my perspective is I'm a games journalist. I need to play games, and I need to, for the most part, play them to completion so I can speak about them in our content and have an informed opinion and be able to guide the people who watch our content into making smart purchases. From the perspective of the person I used to be, where I worked a part-time job at minimum wage, I don't know that there is a cap on how big a game should be. I mean, when I used to have to mow lawns for games, no matter how long the game was, when I finished it, I was still disappointed that I had finished the game. So I think a big part of being a good journalist in this industry is understanding the perspectives and the financial considerations of others. It can be difficult at times. I think it's just human nature to assume that everyone's life is just like yours. And that's something as a journalist in this industry that you kind of have to break through. You always have to kind of stay in touch with what your life used to be before you got games for free. Before you were making a decent salary and spending $60, and anyone has to deal with this. Before you were making a decent salary and spending $60 was a big investment for you. You have to try to keep those perspectives in mind because otherwise you're not serving your entire audience. So I think for people who maybe don't have a lot of disposable income, a game can never be too long. I think for people who have a lot of disposable income and have plenty of time, I think the 35 to 40 hour mark is good. Now, for people who have a ton of money and have no time, I think a campaign for those people around 10 to 15 hours is what they're looking for. And oddly enough, there aren't that many games that are like that anymore. And we can see it on Sifted too. When a game comes out and all the reviews are out, and we've talked about it on GameFace, you'll see a few people in the comments say, "Man, I work 60 hours a week. I have a wife. I have 3 kids. Like, if I can hardly spend 10 hours on a game, and at that, it takes me like 5 months to finish it." So from their perspective, anything over 10 hours is something that's almost demoralizing, like buying it, because they're like, "Oh, I'm going to get started on this. I'm going to get hooked on it. Maybe I finish it by Christmas." So I think that
another good game comes out.
Absolutely. And it's going to. There's going to be another good game. There's probably going to be 10 great games that come out in that time span. So I think really the key to being a decent journalist and being able to inform people about products in this industry is not forgetting where you came from and forgetting how you thought and the sacrifices that you made back then to buy your favorite games and your expectations, what they were. And I think just my background helps because I grew up poor, basically. I didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. I had to make sacrifices. Even in my teens, my mom wouldn't give me a lot of money to buy games, so I would go and mow lawns or do whatever else I could to get money for games. And I did the same thing with skateboarding when I was skating for a long time, like buying a new deck or buying new gear. It was a big sacrifice for me, and games played into that too. It's like, okay, do I want to buy a new deck or do I want to buy a new game this week? And so I think remembering your past is the key to informing people in the future.
Yeah, fair point. And it's an interesting take that we'd only hear really from someone in the journalism industry. Like, it's different for someone like me, who I really can pick and choose how long I play a game. I bought the game in Boxing Week. I didn't really start getting into it right away.
Yeah.
And here I am in March, and I'm still playing it.
Yeah. I mean, you're a perfect example of it. But you're okay. You have the disposable income to buy more games if you want. You're just enjoying the game so much. And you're maybe that outlier, that anomaly, who has a ton of money and still is okay playing games for 80 hours instead of that 35 to 40 hour mark that I mentioned.
Well, and it's interesting because Assassin's Creed Odyssey does offer microtransactions, and you can use that to speed up your progress in the game. So that's probably a reflection of what you were just talking about. These people who don't have a ton of time to play the game. What I was wondering is more from a publisher developer's perspective. They're making these games that are so huge, and like we were talking about before, the less money it costs them and the less time it takes them, potentially more profit. And there is a point of diminishing returns where if a game is 60 hours, 70 hours, or 80 hours, they're really not going to make that much more money off of it.
No.
So, and it's interesting, I think they've gone to alternating development teams with Assassin's Creed, right?
And Call of Duty.
And Call of Duty's been doing that for a while.
Yeah, it's got the 3 separate teams.
That was a smart thing when I first heard Activision doing that. I was like, wow, actually, that's a really smart thing that they're doing, because it is important for them and their bottom line to come out with a game every year, but it's going to be detrimental if that game sucks.
Well, I mean, the way that they set it up, because they have 3 studios working on it, they have 3-year development cycles. And they were used to having a year or 2 years before. So I feel like that extra year has given all 3 of those teams time to polish the game and make it. And, Call of Duty is always really polished. Love it or hate it, it's not generally a franchise that has bugs or has a lot of complaints. There's been some rumblings about how they've handled loot boxes over the last couple entries. I think every franchise gets that at this point. But you're right. Like, their 3-year development cycle has worked out great. It's risen the quality of every single entry in the Call of Duty franchise. And I also feel like it's given those teams some time to experiment and try some new things. Obviously, with Blackout Battle Royale and Black Ops 4, I don't think they could have done that if they hadn't had that extra year. So it certainly works. And I also feel like it intrinsically forces those teams to get their games done in 3 years. So everyone heaps a lot of praise on games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and even Anthem and games like that. Those games in general take, 7, 8, 9 years to develop. It's too much.
Yeah, it's way too much.
When you think about that, and if you watch Pachter Factor, he'll explain that the biggest budget for game development is salary. And that if you average that each person that's working on a game makes $100K, you multiply that by 300 people, then you multiply that by how many years they worked on the game, it's insane. So if your plan is to spend 7 or 8 years developing a game and then hoping that you're going to turn huge profits on that, you're starting behind the 8 ball from the beginning. So I don't know. Overambition is I don't want to stomp on it too much, because a lot of times when you're overambitious, you end up with stuff like Red Dead Redemption 2. Sometimes you end up with stuff like Anthem. So it's a lot of it comes down to the skill of the developers, obviously, and the
two totally different companies there as well.
Yeah, and the oversight of the publisher. How good are they with communicating with their development teams? There's so much that goes into it. But I think no matter what, if you set out from the beginning to have like a 7 or 8 year development cycle, that's probably a bad idea.
Yeah, again, it's the sort of what you're putting in and what you're getting out. Red Dead 2, has scored very well. I started playing it for a few hours and didn't go back to it yet, although I am planning to.
Yeah.
It's one of those games that's just nice to have on the shelf, so when you want to take that journey into the Old West, it's just there waiting for you.
I feel pretty good about our takes on Red Dead 2. We were the outliers when everyone first started talking about Red Dead 2, and no one really had anything bad to say about it. And right from the beginning, I was like, wait a minute, like, there's some weird stuff in this game. It's all very polished and very cool, but some people are going to like it more than others. And so, sometimes you take a look back at your takes on things. You're like, hindsight's always 20/20. So sometimes you take a look back at your takes. You're like, it's maybe a little misguided on that one, but I feel pretty good about Red Dead 2. And we did get that info out there on day one, on the day the game launched. So hopefully it helped some people decide whether they wanted to buy the game. And in hindsight, at least, months later, I feel pretty good about it. We'll see in 3 years if I feel the same way.
Well, I'm wondering, do you think it's how much of a success has Red Dead 2 been? I was just at Walmart last night and I saw a brand new copy selling for, I think it was like $55 or $60. Now, remember, that's like $30 less than I'm used to paying. And I felt like Grand Theft Auto 5 sold full price for years.
Yeah. It did. It absolutely did.
Towards the online, are they really just trying to take what they learned from Grand Theft Auto and just try to get Red Dead into as many hands as possible so they can really open up the online portion?
I think what happened is that the retailers just over-ordered. I think they had the same perspective as you. Hey, this is the next GTA, and this is going to sell like GTA. And by the way, GTA is like 6 years old, and we're still selling it at full price. And I think a lot of them assumed that was going to be the same case for Red Dead 2, because it has been so long since Rockstar put out a new game. And so I think the fact that a lot of people waited so long for it, it reviewed really well, and I'm sure that the buyers knew that it was going to review very well, because publishers have what's called mock reviewers, where they hire, in some cases, ex-game journalists to work for them and basically play the game before it comes out and write a review and say, this is what I think the journalists are going to ultimately say when the game is released. So,
interesting.
Oh, yeah. Publishers always have a pretty good idea of how a game is going to review before they release it. And that has become kind of a lot of the older game journalists, the guys who were my colleagues back at IGN and GameSpot, back when I was at Gametrailers, pretty much all those people have now moved on to doing that. And either they're hired directly by the publisher to do it, or they start their own consulting firm, and they just do mock reviews. And generally, for mock reviews, you get paid a lot more than you get paid to review a game for IGN as like a freelance writer or anything like that. So a lot of these guys have moved out of California and now live somewhere in North Carolina or Pennsylvania, where the cost of living is a lot cheaper, and they can live a really good life just doing mock reviews for these publishers. So Rockstar knew, the publishers knew that it was going to review really high, and I think that the retailers got all that information, and they just over-ordered. And if you saw Rockstar mention that it had shipped, I think, 23 million or 21 million. I can't remember what the figure was. It was one of those.
That's a term I learned about many years ago, and that does not mean sold.
Right, it's shipped. That means that's how many have been sent out to retailers. And I think what happened is that they shipped out those 21 or 23 million units, and they haven't all sold. And so these these retailers are sitting on stockpiles of Red Dead Redemption 2 right now, and they're probably starting to see the sales soften up a little bit, and they're probably starting to panic. And they're like, oh, wow, like, we could get stuck with these. Now, Pachter, on the latest Pachter Factor, does explain how that works. If a retailer does overorder a game, there are mechanisms in place to help them recoup some of that cost from the publisher. So it's not completely dire if you're sitting on a big pile of games, but at the same time, you want to generate revenue. So
when they sell it for $55 or $60, it's still probably more profitable than shipping it back to the publisher.
I think in Canada that's probably cost, to be honest with you. The profit margin on games is small. Yeah, I think it's like $8 per game once everything else is taken out of it. And looking at the exchange rate with Canada, I'm guessing probably that price is right around what the retailers paid for it. And they're probably looking at it like, hey, we'd rather sell this stuff, get people in the store, maybe they buy something else, than just having Rockstar reimburse us for this stock that we have sitting around.
Yeah, it could sell a PlayStation 4.
Right, exactly. Also, I mean, people are going to still keep buying it. Rockstar is the master of marketing. They run commercials for their games for years.
That's crazy.
It is insane. Like, Sony used to do this back in the PS2 and PS3 era. It would run commercials for its exclusives like Ratchet and Clank for literally years after the games came out. And I think Rockstar learned this from Sony, that when you're talking about the mass market, it works. And so we're gonna keep seeing commercials for Red Dead Redemption 2. People are still going to want to buy it. I just think the retailers freaked out a little bit, and they're like, okay, we know it's going to keep selling, but it's not going to keep selling a pile this big well. And so I think that they're just maybe hedging their bets a little bit and making sure that they're not at financial risk.
Yeah, makes sense. So we've talked about, short games, developments, and long games that are maybe too long, and the companies that make them. And I think there's a company that's maybe more in the middle, and that would be Nintendo.
Yeah.
Now, they really seem to me to be a company that is interested in delighting their consumers. They have a very loyal fan base.
Yep.
And so I think they've done a good job with their brand, even though they've definitely had some ups and downs. I'm wondering if they don't have a strategy right now that they maybe not have mentioned, but they seem to have these games in the pipeline, and I've heard rumors about these games that that are done, and they're just sitting there, and they're just sort of waiting to decide when the best time to release them is, perhaps when they don't have something better, when they have like an empty quarter. And those two games that I've heard rumors of is Metroid Prime Trilogy, some kind of a remaster, right?
Yep.
And a game that I'm glad you guys mention from time to time. I'm never going to forget that it's supposed to be coming, and I believe Shigeru Miyamoto said like 2 years ago that it was almost done, and that's Pikmin 4. Where the hell is Pikmin 4?
I have no idea.
We love to play this game. We actually platinumed the co-op on the Wii U, which was not easy, let me tell you.
Yeah.
A little bit of fighting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
We'd love to play this game when it comes out.
Yeah, it's really weird to me because if Nintendo needed a game like that, it was last year. I mean, it had a good year, don't get me wrong. I mean, it had pretty steady releases, but it didn't have enough big first-party games in the early part of the year. Obviously, at the end of the year, you had Smash Brothers and you had Pokemon Let's Go. But if you look at the first, 8-9 months of the year for Switch, it was really barren. And it could...
a lot of indies.
Yeah. And it could have absolutely used Pikmin 4 in that window. So that, to me, tells me that maybe Miyamoto wasn't quoted accurately. A lot of these interviews with Japanese developers, you're relying on your translator to get everything just right. And I can speak from personal experience that I have in the past said or reported things that ended up being untrue because a translator just didn't translate things correctly. I just, after the early part of the year the Switch had last year, I just find it hard to believe that if Pikmin 4 was indeed done, that Nintendo wouldn't have released it last year. So I question that, and even maybe, he said that and it was true, but then I'm just wondering if maybe the whole game is being reworked in some way. Because if you think about it, it was created for the Wii U and not the Switch.
This quote was sort of just before Switch even had come out, so...
Yeah. So my guess is that maybe they're reworking it in some way. They're tweaking it in some way. Metroid Prime Trilogy, I have a feeling that was probably supposed to come out like a month or two before Metroid Prime 4 to get people back into the franchise and get them excited for it again. And I think now that Metroid Prime 4, the original version, has been scrapped and Bandai Namco is no longer working on it, now it's been handed to Retro and it just started development. I would not expect to see that for, I hate to say it, but probably a couple more years.
Oh, at least, yeah.
I mean, if you've ever worked with or as a part of marketing programs, if you're trying to create some kind of bumper marketing for a product, you don't release it 2 years before the product comes out. You generally do it a month or two beforehand to kind of get interest in whatever it is that you're marketing kind of up to that appropriate level again. So
I wonder if Metroid is a special case because it does have a sort of a grassroots following. If it serves the fan base better to give it to them now or like sometime in the next year or two to say, hey, we haven't forgot about you. We know you love these games and you're looking for the next one. We don't have it for a while. Here's this in the meantime.
But I think that's the problem, though, is that they need more than that core group of Metroid fans to buy Metroid games. If you look at Metroid Prime 1, 2, 3, none of them sold very well. I mean, Metroid Prime 1 was like Game of the Year. I think its aggregate when it first came out was like a 96 or a 97. It may have come down since then. It was literally like a game of the generation type game, and it sold like 2 or 3 million copies. So I think Nintendo, and I think that's a big reason why Nintendo has consistently sloughed it off onto other developers, is it doesn't want to take the risk of building a Zelda-like Metroid game that takes years and years to create for it to sell a couple million copies. And I think they just rather pay a Bandai Namco or a Team Ninja or whatever to build a game and then just publish it. And I just think that's what's been holding it back, is that it just doesn't hit a mass market audience like Mario Kart or Smash Brothers or Mario or Zelda. It's always kind of been the redheaded stepchild of Nintendo's first-party offerings, and I think Nintendo wants to change that. In all honesty, it needs to change that. And so catering to the hardcore Metroid fans, to me, is a fool's errand, because they're going to buy it no matter what. They bought Other M. If they bought Other M, they're going to buy Metroid Prime 4 no matter what. As long as
however many people bought Metroid M is your base.
Is your base. Yeah, that is your baseline. That is worst case scenario, basically. And so Nintendo knows it has those people already. And so I think anything that's going to do with Metroid Prime 4 is going to be targeted towards finally getting that franchise to appeal to a wider audience and ultimately have those people actually purchase the game.
That's interesting. I didn't really think about that too much, and what you said about Metroid Prime, the first one, makes me wonder if that game was maybe too niche. You know,
too niche?
Like a space first-person sort of shooter with kind of if I recall correctly, it didn't have like a camera control. It had like a weird system.
It has a lock-on system. Yeah, it automatically locks onto targets. It's weird. I like it. It's not a first-person shooter. Like, a lot of people will watch footage of any Metroid Prime and be like, oh, that's a first-person shooter. It's not. The auto-lock changes the tone of the entire game. It's not about how good you are aiming with dual sticks. It's more about timing and space.
Adventure, exploring.
Yeah, and then you have, like, the whole scanning element to it. It just takes kind of the action edge off of it. It makes it more about just kind of exploring and finding things, and it's not like when you get into combat, save for the boss fights, it's not like when you get into combat you're constantly threatened with death. And I think that's right. I think that's why people were so impressed with Metroid Prime 1, is that Retro managed to nail Metroid in 3D. That hardly ever happens. Nintendo is very good at this, figuring out how to take one of its old 2D franchises and then bring it into 3D and make it a huge success. A lot of other publishers have been terrible at it. Nintendo's really good at it. And I think that is what struck people the most. You probably don't know this or remember it. You may not even have been into games back when it came out, but people were very freaked out about Metroid Prime because it was handed to this new studio. It wasn't being developed by Nintendo of Japan. There was horrible things coming out about Retro Studios while it was under development. Like, the owner of the studio was like this crazy, like, alcoholic frat boy playboy guy. And all these pictures had been released online of him on these lakes in Texas on these yachts, and people were like, "Oh my god!" And there's like girls all around him, and it was bad. I mean, it was the antithesis of Nintendo. Seeing the head of Retro Studios pounding champagne with a bunch of girls with breast implant, like it was just like, what is going on here? And so there was this crazy fear that the game was going to be a piece of crap. Nintendo comes in, and a lot of people compare Miyamoto visiting Retro as Darth Vader visiting the Death Star. And because he showed up and everyone's like, oh crap, like he's here, like what are we going to do now? And he actually went in and whipped that studio into shape and got the game out. So there was a lot of fear about Metroid Prime not living up to the pedigree and ultimately being nothing like the 2D Metroid games, and it absolutely nailed it. So, and look, Metroid is never, even back in the 2D days, it was not one of Nintendo's best sellers. It has always been a niche franchise for Nintendo, and I think that's probably one of Nintendo's bigger tasks now over the next 3 or 4 years is to try to get that franchise where all its other ones are.
Well, I'll tell you a little funny story and give you a little idea of how long I have been playing games. I'll give you a hint since the Atari 2600.
Okay, good. All right.
I age myself, but there was a time.
You're one of us.
Yeah, I used to, sneak out in the middle of the night, turn the volume off, and play games.
Yeah.
But one of the things I remember back when you could go to a store, buy a game, take it home, try it, decide you didn't like it, it wasn't for you, take it back to the store,
yep,
and they would take it. And I bought The Adventures of Link, Zelda 2. Tried it, was not the Zelda game I was expecting. Took it back, bought Metroid, beat Metroid.
Yeah.
So, yeah, for sure. So here, just a quick question on Metroid. What do you think would do better if they came out with another not in-house produced, but like they're doing with Retro, and have a 2D side-scrolling Metroid, brand new? What do you think would do better, that or Metroid 4?
Oh, that's a good question, man. Huh. If it was like a really like big budget AAA, as I hate to say, 2D Metroid, I honestly think it would outsell Metroid Prime. I really do. It's crazy to say that, but I think it would.
It'd be more accessible, probably.
Yeah, it's more accessible. I just think the affinity for 2D Metroid is bigger than the affinity for Metroid Prime. I just think it is. It's been around longer. There's a lot of people our age that when they think of Metroid, that's what they think of. They don't think of Metroid Prime at all. I think it would be close, but I think the 2D version might inch out ahead ultimately, which is weird to say, but yeah, I think that's true.
They probably need less marketing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, now, that's a good point.
See, that is the other question.
Things are getting dicey with Nintendo now because it doesn't have a separate handheld.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that's a transition for Nintendo, is not having those two separate platforms and having them both sort of congealed into one. And it appears that a lot of the in-house teams that were working on 3DS games have moved over and are just making games for Switch now. So is it possible that one of those teams could create a 2D Metroid? Absolutely. Why haven't they done it for several years? That's sort of the rub, isn't it? It's like, why has Nintendo decided that it doesn't feel like this is worth pursuing?
We're almost lucky that we got the Metroid 2 for the 3DS.
Yep, and that was just basically a remake. So it doesn't appear to be a priority at Nintendo to make 2D Metroid games, which is a shame, because I do think that if you made a really good, new, original 2D Metroid, that it would sell very, very well.
Oh, I would think at least 5 or 6 million.
Yep, easily. On the Switch, probably more than that.
Yeah, probably. It's the perfect platform.
Yep, with the install base that's already there, yeah, it would do very well. So, Nintendo's smart. Maybe it's already working on one. We haven't seen all of its 3DS studios doing stuff for Switch yet. There's a couple outliers out there right now. A couple of them are still kind of finishing up their last 3DS projects. But what are those teams going to do whenever that transition comes? The 3DS is pretty much done at this point. So when those projects are finished, my guess is they move on to Switch, and maybe we do see something like a 2D Metroid.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that you thought that was dicey, the combining of the two, the mobile and the home console divisions. I remember hearing about that, and I know you guys have talked about it on GameFace, and it seems like it would be a good idea. Consolidating those teams, making better quality products more often, more focused.
It's good for consumers. It's great for us. We only have to buy one platform to get all Nintendo's games now. But is that good for Nintendo?
Right.
Because what people forget is Nintendo makes a profit on its hardware. Other platform holders don't. Nintendo does. It makes sure it has a profit margin. That's why we're paying so much for a Switch. That's why the Wii U was still basically full price when it was killed. Nintendo feels that it's necessary to turn a profit on every piece of hardware it makes. So that's where it has an advantage. So if you figure even the 3DS, which, compared to prior Nintendo handhelds sold, it pales in comparison as far as sales are concerned. Still, you do that math, and you figure they sold roughly 50 million 3DSs across all the different versions and everything, and then you multiply that by a $50 or $100 profit margin, which is not out of the question for the 3DS, because the prices on that haven't even dropped all that much all this time.
No.
But the manufacturing costs are pretty much at rock bottom now. So you figure they make $50 to $100 off every 3DS. You multiply that by 50 million. Think about that.
Yeah.
Think about how much money Nintendo made off of hardware. Nobody does that anymore. Everybody else follows the Razer and Razer Blades model. We sell the console at cost, or we lose a little bit of money on it, and then we make it all up on software. Nintendo makes money off of both. So it's
they're
good.
Saying they're going to sell more Switches then if they're sort of just discontinuing eventually the 3DS.
They're assuming that they're going to sell enough Switches that would make up for the loss of the 4DS or whatever else Nintendo would have decided to release after the 3DS. So, yeah, I don't see that happening. I really don't. And I also think the profit margin on console hardware, the Switch, is a lot less than the profit margin that they had on the 3DS. So this is a conundrum for Nintendo. That is literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue that could be lost just on the hardware alone. Then you start talking about selling the cards, the games on 3DS, and those are going away. Now you're just buying it on one platform. So I know personally I am spending way less money on Nintendo over the last year and a half or 2 years than I have in the past. I don't know about you, but if
I'd say the same.
Yeah, I mean, if I went back and started adding up like how much money per year I spent with Nintendo during even the Wii U and 3DS era, or the Wii and the handheld era, that kind of transition there, used to spend way more on Nintendo products than I do now. So, at least for me personally, anecdotally, it's not working out for Nintendo if you just take me as a case study.
Well, they're a little peripheral crazy there, too, with like the Wii. So there's a lot of money they made there, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, the profit margins on like that Mario Kart Wii steering wheel that they packed in and then sold separately for like 15. I mean, that thing probably cost them like 75 cents to make. So
3D print one of those now.
Yep, and then you start talking about Amiibo and all that other stuff that Nintendo's been selling. Yeah, I mean, maybe it can start making up for some of that lost revenue with some of that peripheral stuff that they're doing. But that seems to have gone away a good bit with the Switch. They're obviously selling Joy-Cons at an exorbitant price.
Oh, ridiculous.
It's insane how much they're charging for those, but people got to buy them. If they want to play multiplayer, they're going to have to buy them. So the profit margin on those Joy-Cons is probably like, I don't know,
huge.
like 100%. Like they're selling them for that much, and they probably make them for like $25.
Technology in there, though. I've heard that they're, with the gyroscoping technology and all the stuff, they're probably not super cheap to make.
Yeah. There's a lot in there. I mean, you have your IR camera and all that. I'm not saying that they're not like little mini marvels. They are. It's amazing what they do. But $25 to build one of those is a lot. And I think that, to me, is like max cost to build something like that. Because the technology, they have a lot of technology, but there's nothing really innovative or new in it. I think what's innovative about it is that they managed to get all that tech down into that little form factor.
Well, it's a good thing for Nintendo. There's a lot of profit margin in cardboard.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was talking about at Game Face this week. It's like that Nintendo Labo stuff. It's like, really? A perforated piece of cardboard is going to cost me $20? Like, it goes back to Pachter saying Nintendo could sell cardboard to Nintendo fans. He said it like 7 years ago, and he was absolutely right.
Well, I thought we'd have a little section on investing. As you mentioned, Pachter, he's an industry analyst, and he is a very popular figure on the Sifted.net site. I've been a fan of his since Bonus Round and, going way back.
Pack Attack.
Yeah, exactly. And I've been lucky enough to have a few questions answered by him. So on the investing note, and as we're talking about Nintendo, I do still feel Nintendo is probably a good investment for somebody who's looking for a game company to invest in. Now, I'll preface this by saying I'm a self-directed investor. I am not giving any professional advice to anybody.
That's smart.
I will give one note of if you are going to buy Nintendo, it's a little different than your average stock in that it's a pink sheet.
Right.
And what the important thing to remember about that is when you put a buy order in for Nintendo stock, do not put market price. You need to put a very specific price that you're willing to pay, because you can just get into all kinds of trouble paying way more than you intended to. So just so as everybody knows that.
Pro tip.
Yeah, that's a pro tip, because I've heard horror stories. People are like, "Oh, I wanted to buy it for $20 and it cost me $100."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would just say in general that do your homework before you invest. Period. It seems like it's easy. Oh, I just go somewhere and just buy. And you know what? With Robinhood, that new app, it is kind of that easy.
It's almost a game, right?
It's almost too easy. I mean, if you think about it, because I think a lot of people look at the stock market as like it's something that rich people use that I can't afford, and I hate it because the rich people keep getting richer from the stock market, and I don't have enough disposable income to do it. And there's some
feel it's rigged.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's some truth to that, and I dabble in stocks very lightly. Like I seriously own like 3 stocks, and I own 0 video game company stocks. And people always
interesting.
It is interesting, and you know, I have friends who really aren't into games that much, but they're big investors. Like I have one friend who's a gigantic day trader, and he always calls me and asks me for tips on games, like game investing, and I'll tell him, and he's like, "So why aren't you getting in on this?" I'm like, "Because I know too much. Like I know how these companies work. I've watched their stocks go up and down. For instance, the last time I talked to him was before Red Dead 2 came out last year. And he's like, "What's up with Red Dead 2?" And I'm like, "It's going to be great. It's going to sell like crazy. It's only going to be available for a month. It's going to be the best-selling game of the year." And he's like, "So should I buy Take-Two?" And I was like, "Well, if you're going to buy Take-Two, now's probably a pretty good time to do it. Their sales are going to go through the roof. They're going to have a great quarter." And so he did. And Red Dead Redemption came out, and the stock tanked.
Yep.
Tanked. And this all feeds into what I was saying about telling people to be careful, because it's very easy to look at something like that and say, okay, Red Dead's about to come out, so I'm going to buy this stock, and that stock is going to shoot up. But what happens a lot of times with stocks is something that's about to happen gets baked into the price. So
exactly.
People who buy stocks were already knew Red Dead Redemption 2 was coming out. They're the sharps. They were buying that stock back when it was $30 cheaper. And they're like, Red Dead's coming out in like 8 months. I'm going to buy it now when it's rock bottom. By the time it comes out, it'll be high. And then maybe after it comes out, it'll keep going up. But if not, I can sell and I still make a ton of money. The problem is a lot of people who are rookie investors make the mistake of being too reactive and not proactive. And the other folks who are making tons of money on the stock market are always proactive. They're always looking on the horizon and saying, okay, what's going to happen that I know is going to happen, but maybe it's a little ways off, instead of people who are trying to come in and get rich quick like my buddy. I mean, that's really what he was doing. He was like, how can I make a ton of money off of Take-Two in like 2 weeks and then sell it and then take my profits?
Yeah. I could have made a lot of money quickly.
No, you're right. It's true. So, you know, I just, when you talk about stocks, a lot of people, I think it makes it sound like it's really easy to do and it's safe, and it's not. It's very risky. It's very dangerous, and that's why I would recommend for most people to get the Robinhood app and just put like a couple $100 in your account and just fiddle with it and just mess around with those. Buy some really cheap stocks, do a little research so you kind of understand how stocks work and what makes them go up or what makes them go down, and just fiddle around with your $200. If you lose your $200, no loss. At the very least, you taught yourself that you should stay out of the stock market, which could save you literally tens of thousands of dollars. Best case scenario, you turn that $200 into $5,000, and then that $5,000 you just balloons up to something you could actually retire with. So, it's I think you were very smart to sort of have the disclaimer at the beginning of this topic, because you're putting
get into trouble.
You can very quickly, and a lot of people too will start working in stocks, hit it big, and be like, "This is easy." And then go all in. Just basically, you know, invest every extra penny that they have, and that can end really badly. So,
well, the first thing you do is don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right.
a cardinal rule of investing. You want to diversify.
Yep.
And that can mean owning a couple of different game companies. That can mean owning just a game company and then something else in another industry altogether.
Yep.
Some interesting things about, so somebody might look back at Take-Two, where they were when the first Red Dead came out, and be like, well, how come after that game came out, the stock price jumped like, 15, 20%, and now this time it didn't. Now, you mentioned it was baked in, and that's a very good point, because when the first Red Dead came out, nobody really knew if it was going to be this big hit or not. So what it did is it exceeded expectations quite a lot, and that's why all of a sudden the shareholders jumped in. Now, the opposite effect happened this time. Another interesting thing is the cyclicalness of the industry, which is I got into investing probably about the perfect time, which was just in around 2008.
Yes, you did.
You
did very, very well.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It was great. I actually did get into some Take-Two, and at around $8, if you can believe that.
Wow.
And I held it for many, many years, and I eventually sold it for $48 because I thought...
you lost out on so much more money.
Well, no, here's the thing, Shane. You'd say that, but I put that into Advanced Micro Devices, AMD, because I thought I'd rather be in all the platforms.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And since then, I think my investment there went from $5 to what it is today. I'm still holding about $22. So I was able to buy many more shares, thankfully.
But Take-Two went up over 100, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. I think it's around 89 now. I think it was up to like 130, which is just crazy.
So you still would have made way more money if you had hung on to Take-Two for a little while longer. But it's all about the risk and all the other parts of it. Yeah.
And what's interesting is console cycles make a big impact on how these game companies do.
Yeah.
And we're kind of like, you'll notice some of these companies, a lot of the companies have been kind of trending down. And I will say for various reasons. Like, you have the fact that the console this generation is coming to a close. But, obviously Activision has done some things on top of that to make people not have faith in their company. Electronic Arts has shown some of that same stuff. So I think that they're maybe getting a little more affected. But honestly, if people look back to when the last console, the transition between then and where it's come since then, you'll see. And Pachter actually wrote this really amazing, huge, like 122-page video game like analysis that I downloaded and went over right around that time, around 2008, 2009. And everything he said, well, I shouldn't say everything, but a lot of what he said came to fruition.
Wow. So Pachter made you a ton of money is what you're saying.
Well, he just backed up my faith in the industry.
Okay.
And the cyclical nature of it. Like, I knew, obviously these game companies are going to sell most when there's the highest console base and, they can reach the biggest audience. So
I think that's changing though. I think that's changing though. I don't know that it is so cyclical anymore because you have backwards compatibility. I think you're going to see a lot of the early games that are going to come for PS5 and Xbox 2. You're going to be able to play them on PS4 and Xbox One. And so
you didn't really have before.
Yeah, that's never really happened before. So I think from that perspective, I think the cyclical thing isn't as big a deal anymore. It might just be this thing now where it just goes up, 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 up.
It should be a smoother transition for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So maybe now is the time to start looking at the people who are bailing off of these stocks and get in. Again, I'm not telling you to buy stocks. Don't blame me if you lose your ass.
I would say, buying a company that you know well.
Yeah.
I've grown up with Nintendo, and I did invest in Nintendo for a little while. Another funny story is that it sat at $16. Oh, it's like the Wii U. It was in the bottom, the dregs of the Wii U. And I was like, man, Nintendo, and
it can't get any worse, right?
It can't get any worse. It came off of being worth almost $80.
Yeah.
At the peak of the Wii, it was worth almost $80. It's sitting there at $16. I'm like, this is Nintendo. Like, tons of cash, all these properties, got to be worth more than $16.
Yeah.
So I put in a bit of money, and then it sat there for a little while, and then suddenly it jumped. In 3 days, it did 3 huge days, and I was like, my.
Did you sell?
I did sell.
Yeah.
In a week, it would have got up another 20%, and I was just like, oh my god! But what it was the whole Pokemon Go.
You still made your money though. You took your profits, and that's important.
It was funny because it was Pokemon Go that made it jump up like that.
I think the hardest thing for me with stocks is selling. I tend to hold on to stocks too long. Because I see it go up, 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 and when it starts to go down a little bit, I never am convinced that it's going to keep going down. And then it turns into this thing of, but it was this amount, and now it's this amount, and I could have sold it at this, so I'm going to hold it until it goes back to that at least. It's this crazy, like, mental gymnastics that you play with yourself with stocks, which, again, is why I do not recommend that people get into the stock market. If you can afford it, do it. Good luck. But, and I think, again, that's where Robinhood is really good. Like, people can just put down, they can even just buy penny stocks if they want and just fiddle around with it. Maybe they hit, maybe they don't. But at least it shows them how it works. It's a good cautionary tale for people, I think.
Yeah. I have three little rules for myself when I'm wondering if I should sell a stock. And one is, do I need the money, like for family reasons, health reasons? Do I need this money? Do I need to sell right now? Is there a better place that I think that my money could be making more money?
Yeah.
And then finally, has my original reason for buying into this company changed? Has something changed about the company?
I like
and
that.
If those three things haven't changed, then I feel like I'm pretty happy keeping my money there and hopefully going up. So
yeah, I like that.
Yeah, awesome. So I don't know if you wanted, we had one last topic here. I participated in your fantasy draft at sifted.net, which I didn't do last year. I don't know if it was available to everybody last year, but it's definitely available to everybody this year.
Yeah, we cracked it open to a lot more people this year. And I think part of that was because, like, somebody stole the idea and launched a website for it, and, like, all the other publications. It's so funny that we did this for so many years, and it took that many years for all the other publications to start doing it.
Well, it's kind of an obvious idea in a way. It's like people love fantasy drafting and people love video games.
Yeah. But a lot of times the best ideas are the ones where you're like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
And this was one of them that just for whatever reason we were the first ones to do it. And this year we saw everybody kind of jumping on the train. And so I felt like we needed to expand it a little bit to get people more involved. Otherwise the whole thing was going to be taken away from us. I mean, that's just being honest. And so, yeah, we did a big draft with a bunch of people, and then one of our users set up a challenge where people could pick 10 games, and then we're going to give a free game to the person who wins that. So, yeah, we definitely did a lot more stuff with it this year, and I think that's going to continue going forward. People seem to enjoy it, and it's one of those things that you stay engaged with all year long. As a game comes out, you're always looking, okay, did I have that game? I don't quite remember what my lineup was. Oh, no, he has it. Oh, it tanked. Good. I'm glad it's just this thing that's always kind of in the back of your mind, and it's fun. Like, you end up rooting for games to do well, and you end up rooting for other games to do badly if you're in a close battle. It's a lot of fun, and it's been fun watching everybody else kind of embrace it, too.
Well, and it's a fun segment on Game Face to see you and Matt go at it and, have your interaction, and then you guys usually have maybe some kind of a bet.
Yeah.
If the loser, like, he might make you play Dark Souls or something. Or, let's say, Bloodborne.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. We can just go over my picks, and I'll say that my picks were more based on what I thought just the best games were going to be, like which were going to score well, and not so much are they actually going to come out this year.
All right, let me give a letter grade to your squad.
Okay.
What are your games?
I got Cyberpunk 2077.
That's pretty risky.
If it comes out, I'm feeling pretty confident.
Oh, yeah, you should be. But I think the chances of it coming out this year are pretty slim.
They're pretty slim.
Yeah.
Number 2, I got The Last of Us Part 2.
Wow, you really went with risk on this.
Swinging for the fences. So.
Yeah.
So, again, it's probably not going to come out this year, but if it does, it should score very well. A game that should be coming out this year, I'm pretty sure, is Doom Eternal.
Yep, that's coming out this year.
And
that's good for a third rounder.
Yeah, people really like the last one. So
it scored really high as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I would go for a little different choice here. A game that was definitely popular, but not what would be considered a AAA title, and that's Ori and the Will of the Wisps.
Yeah, that was one of my better picks in the official Sifted draft. I mean, every season, I guess I'll call it seasons instead of year, there's always a couple games that no one's going to think about, but are going to score really high. One of those crutches that I've leaned on in the past is Fire Emblem. People always forget about Fire Emblem, and then it comes out, and it always scores really freaking high. Actually, Matt scooped me on that this year. He drafted it before I did. But there are always these little franchises that always score really high, but people just kind of forget about them because they don't get a lot of marketing, they don't get a lot of press, and that is how you win video game fantasy drafts. Because you can take those games in like the 8th, 9th, 10th round, and you end up getting like an 8.7 out of like your pick, you win. Like that's how it works. That's how you win. Because ultimately all these big budget AAA games, they're going to come in 9 times out of 10, anywhere from an 8 to a 9, or maybe an 8 to a 9.3. It's the games lower in the draft where you're picking from AAA games that'll probably get, or B-level AAA games that'll get like a 70 or something like that. You're trading that in for this indie that can get you near a 9, and that's the game changer. That's typically how you win. So
well, awesome. I love to hear that.
That was a really good pick. Yeah.
Nice. So then I realized I hadn't picked a Nintendo game yet, so I went with Animal Crossing.
Again, another good pick. That's another that actually is another franchise that people forget about that scores gigantic every single time. So again, another pick. You're doing well. You were too risky in the first 2. You also probably could have got those 2 first games later in the draft because people are going to be afraid to draft them because they don't know if they're coming out. That's the other part of fantasy drafts. That's the strategy of it that a lot of people don't understand until they do it for a long time. Like even in fantasy football, like when you play in a fantasy football league with people who are new to it, they don't think about, could I get this player later on in the draft? They're just like, I like that player. I want that player on my team. I'm going to draft him now. It's like players who draft quarterbacks in the first few rounds. Like some people are like, Aaron Rodgers is amazing. Tom Brady is amazing. Why wouldn't I want him on my team? Well, you want him on your team, but the fact of the matter is most people draft the running backs first. And so if you're taking a quarterback early, you're passing up on a running back that you'll never be able to get later. You will be able to get that quarterback later. And it's the same with video games. It's like you want to front load your draft with games that you know a lot of people are going to want. And then you wait till the later rounds to draft stuff like Ori or Fire Emblem or Animal Crossing because a lot of people don't think about them as franchises that typically score high. So there's a lot of strategy that goes into it that I think the people that don't participate don't really get.
Well, I'm not exactly sure how this particular drafting setup works because it's just I make my picks and then submit it to the website and then it went through. So
yeah, you were in the challenge, right? The sifted challenge. Yeah. So that one you're not it's completely different. You're right because you're not picking against anyone. If someone else takes the game, you can still pick that game. So. Yeah, and that's the challenge that was set up on Sifted that anybody could join. But if you're doing a snake draft, that's when you have to think about, hey, should I waste this pick on this game, or can I get this in the 10th round instead, and then get the games that I know everyone else is going to pick now? So
there's some actually really good board games that are kind of on that same principle. You have turns picking things. Do I pick this now? I want it, but maybe nobody else will pick it. I can get it later.
And part of that, too, is like knowing who you're playing with and against. If you're in a draft with a lot of Nintendo fans, you know that they're going to snatch up those Nintendo games early in the draft. So if you want them, you're probably going to have to take them earlier. Vice versa, if you're playing with somebody who is a big Xbox fan or a big PC gamer or a big handheld gamer or whatever, they're going to pick those games probably before you do.
So do we think for my number 6 pick, is Ghost of Tsushima going to be coming out this year?
Well, I'm sure you watched Game Face this week. There have been rumors.
I'm still watching it.
Yeah, it's a long one. There have been rumors about both The Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima coming out this year. Ghost of Tsushima, they're saying August 30th. Wow. And The Last of Us Part 2, they're saying in October for Halloween. So one of them was like a poster that was leaked out that showed the release date. That was for The Last of Us Part 2. And then Ghost of Tsushima, a German retailer, listed it for August 30th. Now, that August 30th date is important because it's not August 31st. If it was August 31st, then it would lead you to believe that it was placeholder because a lot of times they'll just put the last day of the month in of when they think it's coming out. The fact that it's specifically the 30th and the 30th falls on a Friday, it looks a little more plausible. Do I think both those games are coming out this year? No, I don't. But signs are kind of pointing to the idea that there's a possibility at least. And then conversely, Kojima just basically confirmed that Death Stranding has been delayed. So Death Stranding, not going to see that this year without a doubt. And it looks like it's about 50-50 whether you're going to see Ghost of Tsushima and The Last of Us Part 2.
Well, if those come out this year, what comes out next year?
Yeah, well, the PlayStation 5.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's going to need some launch titles.
Well, and those will be launch titles because
Oh, right, yeah,
they're going to... Remember, The Last of Us was a bridge game as well between the PS3 and the PS4. It came out right at the end of the PS3, and then a little bit later they put out the enhanced version for PS4. I'm guessing all three of those games are going to do the same exact thing.
yeah.
If they release for PS4 in the first place,
Yeah.
which to me is a little dicey, but after you've marketed those games for that platform, it's really hard to not release it for that platform. So I think all three of those games are going to play on both PS4 and PS5. And again, that goes back to what we were talking about console cycles and how they're not as cyclical as they used to be. Like, I would not count out The Last of Us Part 2 in selling really well because it's going to be a PS5 game, because it's going to sell on PS4 and PS5, and it'll probably sell on PS6 as well. So the times, they are a-changing, and it's all for the better. It's all for the better for everyone involved. More people can play the games, and the publishers can make more money because they're better distributed.
Well, that's just it, because if it does come out on the PS4, by the time, the PS5 is 2 years old, you can walk in and get a PS4 for dirt cheap, and you'll get the game for cheap, and everybody wins.
Well, we'll see. Console price drops haven't really happened this generation. They happen around Black Friday, of course, but, still, if you want to buy a PS3, you're not buying one for $150 or anything like that. That's typically where the PlayStation consoles had kind of got to at this point in their life cycle. So, and they have a Slim out, too. Typically, that was when the price kind of dropped, is whenever they put out the Slim version of the console, and that hasn't happened. So, I don't know if PS4 will be that dirt cheap, honestly, when PS5 comes out, because they're still selling at the price that it's at now. So
right. Yeah, it's come down a bit, but not a lot.
Not a lot. Yeah, look at Switch. It's still full price. It hasn't dropped at all. Xbox One has had a terrible go of it this generation, and it hasn't dropped all that much even. So it is what it is.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so speaking of Nintendo, my seventh pick is Bayonetta 3. Another, don't know if it's coming out this year.
I don't think it's coming out this year. Nintendo's kind of laid out its roadmap for 2019 at this point. After that last Direct, it kind of filled in some of the holes that it had. It announced release dates for games that we were like, what's going on? Like Fire Emblem for Switch. Like, we hadn't heard anything about that since the announcement of Switch. And out of nowhere, Nintendo's like, okay, it's done, and it's coming out here in like 3 or 4 months. So I would not...
Direct was mostly focused up until June, though, wasn't it? And then sort of the back half is a little more up in the air.
Yeah, obviously you know that Pokemon Sword and Shield is coming towards the end of the year. Yeah. So you do know one game at least for the fall. But you're right. It was all pretty much first half of 2019, that Direct. But I guess, at E3 we'll get the back half. So
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, there's a chance Bayonetta 3 comes out this year, but I think I remembered seeing something from Platinum saying that it wasn't looking good for this year. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw some kind of report where Platinum was like, yeah, we're chugging along, but we still got some work to do or something. Plus, they just seem to be making like 20 games at once anyway, so they're really busy, that studio.
Yeah, no kidding. So number 8 is Anthem. So it's probably good it's this far down on that list.
Well, see, so I participated in that challenge too, and one thing I did not realize was when you were picking games, the higher you picked the game, the more bonus points you got. Do you know
Okay, yeah.
So you're actually good. The fact that you picked Anthem so low, you're not sacrificing a ton of points. Like
cool.
Like, basically, when I did it, I didn't realize that that's how it worked. I just thought, pick 10 games, highest aggregate wins, but it's not. So the game you pick first, you get a multiplier for that.
Oh, cool.
And I picked, because the first game that came to mind was Anthem. Anthem was the first game that I put into my interface. So I have no chance of winning that at all. As soon as I clicked submit, it went back to the original screen, and I saw the multiplier thing, and I was like, ah. Oh, man. I can't win anyway. So
if I have a good chance of beating you, then that's something I'll take.
Everyone has a very good chance of beating me. One, I picked Anthem first, which just puts you right behind the 8 ball right away. So, I can't win it anyway. I can't give myself a game in victory. So, I didn't feel that bad about it. I was like, I can't win. So,
how does the scoring work on this then? So Anthem is whatever score it is now, and in 3 months they do some big update that makes the game way better.
Wherever it sits at the end of the year.
Oh, okay. So you still have a chance. You can do something pretty spectacular between now and December.
Yeah, but the problem is typically what the aggregate is now is not really going to change because publications don't go back and update their reviews as DLC comes out. They just review the DLC. So that base score for the base Anthem game is not going to fudge much. It maybe moves a little as smaller outlets review it, more reviews come in. But it's not going to change because of DLC or post-launch content or anything like that.
Okay. All right, so my second to last pick, number 9, Pokemon.
Yep, smart pick. I might have bumped that up a little higher.
Yeah, I should have put it up higher. If I put it instead of Bayonetta, that would have been smarter. But I didn't know which was going to be coming out. And
yeah, I mean, they had said that Pokemon was coming out this year all along, but it is Nintendo, and so I can understand where there was some trepidation there.
Yeah, fair enough. And then my last pick is Gears 5.
I drafted Gears 5 in a lot of drafts. You look at Gears 4, even though a lot of people weren't over the moon over it, its aggregate is an 8.7.
Yeah, it scores well.
Yeah, and the shine has kind of come off of that franchise. That was a game that I ended up targeting in every draft because I think I got it in like the 5th round with Matt. And I was like, okay, if I can get it in the 5th round with Matt, with other people, I may be able to even get it later. But another thing that happens is once we do our official draft, then everybody watches that, and they're like, okay, and they'll just write down the games that we pick in order, and what I found was Gears and all the other drafts I did ended up being picked basically right where I had picked it, because people were like, okay, that's where Shane thinks it should go, that's where I'm going to try to get it, and that's ultimately what ended up happening. Manifest destiny.
No doubt. How many game drafts have you done this season?
4, I think I did, total. Yeah. It's fun, and it's it's just like fantasy football. Once you do enough research, or you just know enough to do one draft, it's very easy to just do more and more. It's like I'm in 5 fantasy football leagues, and it doesn't really take much more work than it does for me to just do one, because if you just do the work you need to do to win one league, you're good across all the others. And it's the same thing with pretty much any fantasy draft. So yeah, once you're informed enough to do well in one, you're good to do it in all of them, pretty much.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, Shane, I think that wraps us up for today. I want to thank you so much.
It went by fast.
Yeah, no doubt. We're actually over an hour, so I really appreciate that.
Of course.
Thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Everybody should go to sifted.net right now, and you should check out their Patreon. You should watch Game Face on YouTube every week. It's one of the best gaming podcasts out there. You can watch Pachter on YouTube as well for free, but really you should go to Patreon and kick these guys a couple of bucks because they do great work. And you can find me at Twitter, at Grimshaw Games, Shane at Dimfire,
right.
At Sifted as well.
At Sifted Games.
At Sifted Games on
Yeah,
Twitter.
when we set up our social media accounts, the whole idea is that Sifted was going to become more than just games. So instead of just creating a Sifted account, we were like, okay, we're going to do Sifted Games, we're going to do Sifted Entertainment, we're going to do Sifted Politics. And obviously that has not come to fruition, so now I wish I had just used Sifted, but it is what it is.
Sifted movies would be really cool, actually.
I mean, the plan all along was to have sports, entertainment, which would include movies and film, and then tech and politics. And unfortunately, we need investment to be able to build that stuff out, so we're still just working with games now.
Well, you heard it, everybody. If you want to see those things, you got to go to their Patreon. You got to give these guys some money so they can make your dreams come true. And I just want to say thanks again, Shane, and we'll see you online.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.